And
Okay, good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online programming with the San Luis Obispo Library. Today, we are doing a collaboration with the California State Parks with Aaron at Angel Island. It's very exciting because we have a guest speaker as well. And before I give any details about that, I'll let Aaron go on. But my role here is to moderate the chat. If you have any questions, Aaron and I will both be looking at it and passing that on. And so I think we'll do questions at the end, Aaron, or would you?
We can do them throughout. We can do them throughout.
Okay, yeah. So feel free to join in if you have anything and any other questions. Aaron, take the mic.
Great, thanks so much. All right, here I'll go ahead and looks like we already got your spotlight off. Great. So, well, good morning. My name is Erin, and I'm an interpreter here with California State Parks at Angel Island State Park up near San Francisco in the San Francisco Bay. This is not a virtual background. That's the water behind me. It's the real deal. So we're here on the island, and the island's about 3 miles away from San Francisco. So I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I'm here on Coast Miwok land. Coast Miwok were here thousands of years, and this is their land. And today our members, along with the Southern Pomo of Marin County, the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria up in Roanoke Park. But this is their land, so I want to acknowledge that. So I'm just going to put some maps up just to get you all oriented for those of you who may not have been here before or to San Francisco, just so you can see where I am. And as I do that, as I'm getting those ready, I'd like you all in your mind's eye to imagine a map of the world, you know, a world map, and just think about what do you picture when you see an image of the globe or the world. And I'm going to go ahead and put that up. So get that in your mind, and I'm going to put those up. And curious if any of you thought of this map of the Pacific Ocean. And we're here at the U.S. Immigration Station, which was active 1910 to 1940. And the largest group of immigrants that came through here came from China. So that's why I like to start with this image just of the Pacific Ocean. Back in 1910, it would have taken 3 or 4 weeks to cross to come over here to the West Coast. So that was the largest group came from China, the next largest from Japan, and then just all over Asia. But people did come from 82 countries from all over the world. We're just going to kind of zoom in here to until we get to right where we are now. So here you see the United States. Over on the East Coast, there was an immigration station there called Ellis Island. There was also immigration stations up in Seattle and Portland and down in Los Angeles. But we were, during the time period where we were open, we were the largest and the busiest and processed the most immigrants on the West Coast. Just keep coming in here. There you can see San Luis Obispo down there. So you guys can see where you are, where we are. Coming in a little closer still. I like to look at our bay here and think of it as a dolphin or a whale tail. So there's my squishy dolphin, just kind of for fun. And so back then the ships came under where the Golden Gate Bridge is. Now the bridge itself wasn't completed until the 1930s, but it was called the Golden Gate from the time of the gold rush. In fact, in China, people called California Gold Mountain, Gimsan. Coming in a little closer still, I'm just showing you different angles of the bay. But here, this little island right there, that is Alcatraz. So we are 33 times larger than Alcatraz. And we are what's known as a land bridge island. So back before the last ice age, we were connected to the mainland. The coast was actually way out where the Farallon Islands are now. So 12,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, water filled in the bay, we became an island. So it's a little different than an island like Hawaii, which was formed volcanically. So the ferries come in right here, and then it's about a mile walk to our site, but you can actually walk all the way around the island in about 5 miles. So we are just over 1 square mile, 1.18 square miles. And the site where the immigration station is about 14 acres. And coming in a little closer here. So this area is where there was a big 2-story building called the administration building. It's also where the dining areas were. That building burnt down in 1940 from an electrical fire. And that's when immigration operations moved back to San Francisco. But I am standing right now on this porch up here, and this is the building we're going to be going inside, called the detention barracks. So this is the building where immigrants, primarily men, were detained, where they stayed waiting to enter the US. And I'm just going to put a couple more photos up real quick here. So you can see a little bit about what the site looked like prior to modern day. And also, here we go. So this is that administration building. So this building was actually modeled after Ellis Island. Some people called Angel Island the Ellis Island of the West, but in reality, it was the guardian of the Western Gate. It was really more about keeping people out than letting people in. Here's another view of that administration building. And here's a picture of the fire that happened in 1940. It was an electrical fire. And that's when immigration operations moved back to San Francisco. So throughout the program, I'd invite you to type in questions, and I'll stop at various points. At any point you want to do questions, that's totally fine. And I'll keep an eye on that, and Nicole can keep an eye on that as well. So I'd encourage you to do that. Let's see. So one of the things we're going to be looking at when we go inside the building is poetry that the immigrants left on the walls. So I'd actually like to read you a few of those poems right now. That's one of the draws for a lot of people. It's why the building still exists. They were actually, this has been a state park since 1963, and back in 1970, they were actually going to tear this building down. But the poetry was discovered and the building was saved. So just to give you a sense of what some of these poems are about, I'll read one of them right now. Halfway up the hill on island in the building upstairs, the imprisoned one has been separated from his people summer to autumn. 3 times I dreamed of returning to the native village. My intestines are agitated in their 9 turns by the false Westerner. I have run into hard times and am uselessly depressed. There are many obstacles in life, but who will commiserate with me? If at a later time I am allowed to land on the American shore, I will toss all the miseries of this jail to the flowing current. So these poems have quite a lot of emotions to them, a lot of feelings. They really run the gamut of all kinds of things. I'll read a couple more. I have been imprisoned on island for 7 weeks. In addition, I do not know when I can land. It is only because the road of life has many twists and turns that one experiences such bitterness and sorrow. And since you're a library group, I'll read this one here, especially the last line. Living on island away from home elicits 100 feelings. My chest is filled with a sadness and anger I cannot bear to explain. Night and day I sit passively and listlessly. Fortunately, I have a novel as my companion. So I kind of like that one. All right, so again, feel free to type in questions at any point. We're gonna be talking a little bit about what led to immigration operations happening here in San Francisco. We actually have to go back in time to the gold rush. So back in 1848, when gold is discovered in California, there are 50 Chinese people in the entire country, approximately 50 Chinese people. Within 3 years, there's 20,000. And they were primarily coming from the same region in China called Tucson, which is part of the Guangdong province in southeastern China. But what's important to note from the very beginning, the immigrants that were coming from China during the gold rush were being discriminated against, we're facing racism, we're having a hard time from the very get-go. But also during that time, one of the things that they did, many of them were the ones that were responsible for building the aqueducts, the canals that bring water throughout Central Valley in California to support our agriculture. So we really have those Chinese laborers to thank. And then fast forwarding in time to the 1860s, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, the US government actually went to China, to that same region where people had been coming from, to recruit laborers to come build the Union Pacific Railroad that started in Sacramento, and dug the tunnels, blasted the tunnels through the Sierra Nevadas. And what then happened, fast forwarding a little bit further, and then also during that time, they were also facing really hard working conditions and that sort of thing, and still a lot of discrimination and racism. In the 1870s, there's an economic recession in this country. Money's hard to come by, jobs are hard to come by, and Chinese laborers are blamed for taking jobs. And ultimately in 1882 is the first federal immigration law, barring like one specific country, and that's called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And that's what's being enforced here at Angel Island starting in 1910. And that Chinese Exclusion Act was basically one line keeping workers out. So if you were a student or professor or diplomat, a merchant, a clergy person, or the child of a US citizen, those were groups that people were trying to fit into. All right, so let's, I did see a chat come through. Let me take a look at that. Okay, so I think I just mentioned that someone wrote, are you going to talk about what the official standards were to allow people to enter the US and also unofficial, just as racial bias? So I think I addressed that just a little bit with specifically with the Chinese Exclusion Act. So a lot of it was racial bias. And so it started with Chinese, but that expanded to all Asian countries, something called the Asiatic Barred Zone. One country in particular that's kind of interesting that fits into that was actually the Philippines. Back in 1910, the Philippines was a US territory. And so people were considered that were coming from the Philippines were considered US nationals and did not have to come to Angel Island. In the mid 1930s, there's a law that changes that grants the Philippines US independence. And all of a sudden they are considered Asian. And there was actually a ship en route from the Philippines to San Francisco when that law changed. So people boarded that ship thinking they could go straight into San Francisco. That law changes, and now they're detained at Angel Island to be processed. So not everyone that came into San Francisco during those years had to come to Angel Island. If you were first class passengers, mostly Europeans, you didn't necessarily have to come, but people that had any kind of issues with their immigration status, most likely from Asian countries, they are the ones that did have to come here and be processed. So I'd like to go ahead and take you all inside the building now. So I'm going to turn the camera around. We're going to go inside. This building primarily housed men and was segregated by race, basically. So there were three groups. It was Chinese men were in one area, Asian men were in another area, and European men were in a third area. And I say Asian men and Chinese men. Now, Chinese people are part of Asia, but they were actually segregated further out because of that Chinese Exclusion Act. And people came from all over the world, as I mentioned. The largest group from China, the second largest group was from Japan. So we just have some beds set up here representing different countries. And I want you to take a look at these bunk beds. They're very close together. They're right next to each other, 3 high, no ladders. This room alone, the healthy capacity was about 25 people, and there were about 60 beds in it. Now, when we go to the other side of the building, you're going to see it's a lot more crowded. Now, people from Japan and Germany wouldn't have been here necessarily at the same time in the same room, but we do have this set up representing different countries, as I mentioned. So here's a bed with just some traditional German items on it. And let's see, after China and Japan, the next largest groups represented came from Russia. Tied for third was Russia and India. If any of you are familiar with the Indian flag today, you'll know that that's not what it looks like. But during that time, 1910 to 40, it was under British rule. So it's got that British flag on there. And so I'd like to take you over to this next room where you're going to see a couple of inscriptions I wanted to show you, because I mentioned the Chinese poetry, but there's also inscriptions in many languages. So 2 of them that I wanted to show you. The first one was left by a man from India. And set the camera down here so you all can see that. This is written in 2 different types of writing, Urdu and Gurmukhi, from the Punjab region of India, which is near where Pakistan is. And the immigrants that came from India primarily came from that region. They were of the Sikh faith tradition. This is the person's name, Tara Singh, and then there's a date of 1936. Immigrants that came from India actually had one of the hardest times. They were deported at a rate higher than most other immigrants. They were considered something called LPC, which is likely a public charge. So essentially considered having to depend on like the welfare system or the government for financial support. Here's just a photo of some immigrants, some men coming from India. So this is a photo of immigrants here at Angel Island. All right, let's look at one more inscription in this room. And this one starts with some numbers and letters, and that's XII is the Roman numeral for 12. So this is December 25th, 1915. So over 85 years ago, and it's in Cyrillic, which is Russian, and it's translated as the brothers Feingold. These are Russian Jewish brothers. Many of the immigrants that came from Russia were Jewish. And so I like this carving in particular because my family came through the East Coast originally, but there is some Russian Jew in my heritage. And so I'd like to think if I'm related to anyone, maybe it's these guys, the brothers Feingold, who knows. What I'd like to do real quick, I carry a list in my pocket, and sometimes with the school kids, I'll actually have them type it in. But I'm just gonna go ahead and read off countries here. I can find that. real quick. And these are the countries represented here on Angel Island, the 82 countries. So I'm just going to read it out and see if these places your families are originally from, whether it's yourselves or your parents, your grandparents, great-great-grandparents, however far back, if any of those are represented by these countries here. So I'm going to go ahead and read them. Afghanistan, Antigua, Argentina, at sea, and these are birthplaces. Australia, Austria, Belgium, Bohemia, Brazil, British North Borneo, British Samoa, British West Indies, Burma, Canada, Cape Verde, Ceylon, Chile, China, Chosin, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, Cyprus, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Dutch East Indies, Ecuador, El Salvador, England, Estonia, Fiji, Finland, France, French Indochina, which would have included Cambodia and Laos, places like that, and Vietnam. Germany, Greece, Guam, Guatemala, Hawaii, Honduras, Hong Kong, Hungary, India, Iraq, Ireland, Italy, Jamaica, Japan, Korea, Luxembourg, Macau, Malaysia, Manchuria, Mauritius, Mexico, Montenegro, Netherlands, New Idria, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Norway, Panama, Persia, Peru, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Russia, Samoa, San Juan, Scotland, Singapore, South Africa, South America, Spain, Straits Settlements, Sweden, Switzerland, Syria, Tahiti, Tasmania, Thailand, Tonga, Turkey, unknown, USA, USSR, and Venezuela. So I just wanted to, I really do like to read that list out to see, I'm guessing most of you have someone in your family that's from those countries originally. Let's see, I think I saw a couple of chats come through. Let me take a look at those. Was the building heated? I'm just gonna go in the order they come through. Yeah, so it was radiated heat. I'll show you what one of those radiators looked like. Apparently it was still pretty cold. It wasn't super efficient, but here's one of the old radiators. There was actually a woman named Catherine Maurer. We'll just keep walking through the building as we're talking here. And she was a Methodist deaconess and came 28 of the 30 years. She was known as the Angel of Angel Island. She worked kind of like a social worker. And one of the things she did is she would bring warm clothing for the immigrants because although it was heated, it was still pretty cold. Now, 100 years ago, it was a lot rainier, a lot more rain, a lot more wet weather than it is now. And I am going to come back to those questions, but let me just show you this real quick. So right now we're in what we call the Chinese men's recreation room. So we're switching sides of the building. Now, this is set up to represent. So these games, these things that you see here, these are some things they might have had, but not necessarily. These items that you see, these specific items are not from Angel Island. They are from that time period, the authentic time period, but not from Angel Island necessarily. Here you see a record player, some instruments. You know, those poems I read at the beginning talk about being imprisoned and jail, and it certainly felt like that. But they did have these recreation rooms to hang out in during the day. There was also recreation areas outside where they played volleyball or soccer, that kind of thing. Here you see, again, being a library group, I'll show you some of these cool books that you can see with the Chinese writing. And, you know, that one poem, fortunately, I have a novel as my companion. I find that kind of interesting. All right, let's take you over to the next room. So now we're going over to the side. This one area that you're looking at with all of these bunk beds, this is just half of the second floor where the Chinese men were. And we're gonna go downstairs and you can see the size of the whole room. But just this one area had close to 100 beds in it. So it was quite crowded. All right, let's look at the, I'm gonna take a look at your questions because you guys have been asking some great questions here. Okay, let's see. Would immigrants be allowed to leave the dormitories while they were waiting to be allowed into the US? So just to go outside just for recreation time. So again, this building was mostly men. So there were 2 recreation yards, one for Asian men and one for European men. And then the women and the girls and the young boys, and when I say young boys, I'm including boys under the age of 12 who stayed with the women, could walk around the grounds with a matron, a female guard, but they didn't really have their own area to spend time in during the day, so it was a little more confined. Boys that were older stayed with the men, and sometimes boys even younger than 12, if they appeared older, if they were taller, they were stayed out. They stayed with the men. Okay. Oh, I've got one of our volunteers on the call, Bill Warrior. Hi, Bill. He just wrote the men were allowed out twice daily. The women were allowed out once a week. So thank you for that clarification. Oh, that's really cool that Bill's on the call. Oh, that's right. I'm going to bring him in a little bit. Thanks, Bill, for the reminder that you're here. Let's see. Did guards workers on Alcatraz live on the island like they did on Alcatraz? So yes, they were employee cottages where the guards would live. How many were housed at one time and for how long? It really depended. This building alone might have had 300, 400, 500, 600, or close to 600 people at a time, plus women and children. Did married couples and families stay together? Were they housed separately by gender? So they were segregated, they were separated. So when we wrote lighting, it seems dark inside. Yeah, it wasn't too bright. Okay, Bill, I'm gonna go ahead and bring you in now that I see you on the call. Sorry about the delay. And I'm gonna go ahead and spotlight you. Let's see if I can find you there. Make you a co-host. All right, hang on just a second, friends. So Bill is one of our volunteers who has a family connection to the site, and I'm gonna go ahead and bring him onto the screen. Bill, thank you so much for your patience, and I'm gonna let you take it over from here.
Thank you, Erin. Sorry, I was a little late getting in as well. And this is a library group, I understand, from San Luis Obispo. Is that right? Okay, well,
that's correct.
Yeah, welcome to the virtual tour of Angel Island. I'm not on the island myself. Erin is doing all the exploring there. I've been a volunteer at Angel Island since 2009. My expertise on some of this, I defer to Erin on. She's much better read at this point than I am. My primary interest and connection with the immigration station is I married into a Chinese family, and my grandmother-in-law, my wife's grandmother, was held there for 5 weeks in 1926. She was coming from southern China, as Erin mentioned, that region where most Chinese immigrants were coming into the country. She was the daughter of a merchant who had come to California in 1882. So that would give her an exemption to the Chinese Exclusion Act as a merchant's family member. And the plan for her, almost from birth, was she was supposed to marry someone in one of her father's merchant partner's sons who was in the States. So everything was going along to plan. And then her father suddenly died. Her biological father suddenly died, and she lost her exemption. So the plan changed. She was brought in as what is referred to as a paper daughter, coming in with false papers, pretending to be her future father-in-law's daughter. And her birth name was Wang Funyan. She's pretending to be a member of the Chu family. So she's posing as Chu Yuklun to get into the country. And I'll stop it right there. Just don't want to get off topic or what people have specific questions about.
Thanks, Bill. Folks, do you have any questions specifically for Bill? This would be a great time to ask, and you're welcome to raise your hand as well, and you can unmute if you'd like, but I want to give you a chance to ask Bill any questions you might have. So I'll give you just a few minutes to write those in. Bill, well, if they're writing questions, I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about just the daily life of the immigrants while they were here? Maybe some about the food and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm getting this from, again, my grandmother-in-law. I met her when she was 95 years old. She lived to be 100. I was fortunate enough to discover her immigration service file in the National Archives and was able to go over it with her before she passed away. She had very clear recollection of the time she spent on the island. She's all of 18 years old when she arrives at the immigration station. I'm not familiar with the language or culture. She's educated. She's got a high school education. She can write and read, which was not always the case for women at that time in that part of China. So she's describing life there. She said she was a bored teenager on Angel Island most of the time, except for the 2 days that she was interviewed. And that was 2 days, 143 questions, very specific in requiring answers to things like, where is the house located that in the village you live in, how many rooms are in that house, how many windows, what's the lighting system, what's the heating system, what are the names and occupations of the men that you said carried your bags from your home to the first boat you took to from your village in China to get to Hong Kong. How wide was that river? She's coming over with her, what was to be her future mother-in-law. They're pretending to be mother and daughter. Her paper mom is being asked the same questions. And if there's any discrepancy, even a slight one, one of the questions was about windows. They asked her, were the windows on the side of the house or were they skylights? And they were skylights. Okay, is there one in each room? Yes. Are they in the middle of the ceiling or off to the side? If her mom had said middle of the ceiling, she said off to the side, they would work with that and dig and see what else they could find that was a discrepancy. And sometimes just on the basis of a few wrong answers, you could be ordered, excluded, and deported. However, you did have a right of appeal. And very often, invariably, the Chinese would appeal their cases. And very often they would win. In fact, the numbers, when we're guessing out of 100,000 coming through, we think 100,000 based on lost document, we're thinking about 8,000 to 9,000 actually were sent back. So you did have a better than average chance if you're as a Chinese person to get in. It was more of what I understand from my grandmother-in-law and other oral history. There's a culture shock going on. In her case, she's fleeing a regional civil war in China. And so her life, even though it was scheduled for her to get out of the country to get married, she was having to do it under some duress, some pressure. Her life was in danger at the point that she finally decided to leave.
And
yeah.
Bill, someone's asking if you could talk about what a paper daughter is, if you could explain that just a little bit.
Yes. Okay. It refers to essentially either buying or acquiring what were referred to as coaching papers and an identity in China. And you would, in my grandmother-in-law's case, she didn't have to pay for her papers. This was the family that was trying to find a way to bring her over. She would have 4 weeks at sea to study those particulars that the Chinese by 1926 are well aware that immigration is going to be asking them those sorts of questions. And so it specifically reveals simple answers. It's fake ID, a paper son, a paper daughter. That's what that's about.
Thanks. And one thing that's interesting that allowed for that was the 1906 earthquake. So back in 1906, San Francisco has a huge earthquake, and one of the things that burns down is the Hall of Records, City Hall, where records of birth and citizenship are kept. And there essentially creates a loophole now to say, hey, I was born here, I have 5 sons in China, I want to bring them all over, and essentially you can't prove that otherwise. So it did create kind of that opportunity, specifically from San Francisco. But people would come as paper sons or daughters, as like if they were the nieces or nephews, or one of our other volunteers, their father died before they were able to come over. This is our volunteer's mother in particular. And so it came over under their uncle as a paper daughter under their uncle. So it's kind of interesting too. So thank you, Bill. I might bring you back at some point. But thank you for sharing so far. So friends, I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera around again. I want to show you through some more of this room. We're just going to walk through these beds here so you can kind of see again how crowded it is. Initially, Chinese men were not issued mattresses. Now that did change. They were thought to be a hardy peasant class. They didn't need mattresses. They must sleep on the ground. Now this was not true. This was all assumptions. All right, so the lighting in this room is pretty dark right now. In fact, I'm thinking they might not have, our overhead lights might not have gotten turned on this morning, but you can still see some of it. And I want to show you this one area. So we talked a little bit about the poems earlier, and I read you some of those. Now, all of these walls are covered in poetry. So each one of these that you see here, that's a character. And you can see it by the size of my hand, how big it is. This paint is from the 1940s. This building had a second life during World War II for German and Japanese prisoners of war, as well as a stopping point for Japanese Americans, mostly from Hawaii, about 600 men on their way to internment camps. But what happened, so this is one area in the building where paint has been removed down to the bare wood so that you can see what the carvings look like initially. And that black ink you see right there, That's original ink from over 100 years ago. Many of the poems reference the jade, the walls of jade, and jade is a green gemstone, important culturally in China. And many of the years of the operation of the immigration station, it was that green color. So again, this is just the area where paint has been removed to show you what it looked like. This particular poem, and it starts, it's a little hard to tell, but it starts up in the top right and goes top to bottom, right to left. It's 28 characters, and it goes like this. 1,000 sorrows and a hatred 10,000-fold burned between my brows. Hoping to step ashore the American continent is the most difficult of difficulties. The barbarians imprison me in this place. Even a martyr or a hero would change countenance. So it's pretty intense poem there, right? And really very much what a lot of the poems are about. There's another poem that starts, there are tens of thousands of poems on these walls. They are all cries of complaint and sadness. There aren't tens of thousands, that's an exaggeration, but there are quite a lot. Okay, again, please keep those questions coming. I don't see any new ones, but feel free to ask, and we'll go downstairs. Nicole, I see you
about chores.
What was that?
Oh, we had one about chores. Did the immigrants have chores or other duties that they had to perform while on the island?
Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Not that I'm aware of. They were not, again, in any way working for the government. Essentially, that would be what it would be, or they'd be, I would guess, be working without pay. The only thing they had to do was they were responsible for their own laundry, for doing their own clothes. Their bedding was taken care of by the station staff. So I'm not aware of any other specific tasks other than probably keeping your own personal space clean, which essentially your personal space was the space underneath the bottom bunk that you were sharing with 2 other people. So it was very limited space, and you were allowed once a week visits out to a storage shed at the docks to exchange items as you wished.
Thanks. Now you can imagine people were coming with their, they're probably their best items, the things that they treasured the most, right? So as Bill mentioned, so you could have stuff with you here in the barracks, but then if you had larger items, that would be down at the baggage shed where people would come ashore. Let me show you a couple just historic photos here of just what the baggage shed was specifically. I wanted to show you that. And you can see it in a couple different photos that I'm going to put up here for you. And here, let's see, that building off to the left there up in the top corner, this one here, that's the that was the baggage shed. So here you see a picture of immigrants coming onto the shore. There's another one. There's that baggage shed. So the immigrants would come by ship into the bay, and then a smaller ferry such as this one would go get whoever had to come to Angel Island would come on that way. Okay, so let's turn the camera back around. We're gonna go outside. This area here outside, this little grassy area surrounded by the barbed wire fence, this would have been the Asian men's recreation yard. And that building over there was actually just a covered, a pavilion without any walls. But this building was built in World War II as the mess hall because the dining areas had burnt down in that electrical fire in 1940. So we're gonna go downstairs here to the first floor. And again, please type in any questions you might have. And if you'd like to unmute and ask, you can do that as well. So this room here was filled with bunk beds, and it had 196 beds. So all of these poles had bunks between them. And this floor and the floor above, about the same size, that room above was the same size, was for Chinese men specifically. And so there's poetry all over these walls. And we do have the poems published in a book called Island. It's a beautiful book. If that's of interest to you, I'm happy to get that email to Margaret and she can get that out to you. In addition to the poetry, there's some pictures that are carved into the wall. So here's a picture of perhaps a rooster. There's actually quite a few birds. Here's a couple of little birds that you can see on the walls. Over here is a horse that's carved in. And you can look out, looking out these barred windows down to where the water is. Across the way, that's the hospital. So immigrants, if they had any kind of health issues, would be treated there. Where those picnic tables are down there, that's where the Asian dining hall was. I'm going to read, I'd like to recite this poem for you. It's up here on this wall. So this is the actual poem. And again, it starts up in the very top right and goes top to bottom, right to left. And it goes like this. Random thoughts deep at night. In the quiet of night, I heard faintly the whistling of wind. The forms and shadows saddened me. Upon seeing the landscape, I composed a poem. The floating clouds, the fog darken the sky. The moon shines faintly as the insects chirp. Grief and bitterness entwined are heaven sent. The sad person sits alone leaning by a window. Written by Yi of Toisan. And this is one of the few that's signed. And Yi of Toisan is a very general signature. Yi is a common name. Toisan is the region where people came from. I did see a couple questions and I'll get to those in just a moment. Here you can see down to the bare wood, some of the calligraphy. And I think I had a question about the process of writing the poems. So what did they use to carve the poems and drawings? And Bill, if you want to talk about that while I show around some more of the walls and also the process of how the poems got chosen to put on the walls.
Yes, so we're looking exclusively at writings by the men. This became the men's dormitory from 1912 onwards. My grandmother-in-law mentioned that the women were writing in their barracks area, but unfortunately everything was lost in that electrical fire. The Chinese men formed a union of sorts. They called it the Liberty Association to represent their concerns to the immigration staff from day to day. And part of the role of that association was actually to vote on the poems they thought were the best written. And those were the ones we're seeing up on the walls. There would be a brush painting in of the individual characters in what is described as a perfect square, where each character you can draw an exact perfect square around it. Aaron's actually homing in on something I wanted to mention in the process. You can see where this process was interrupted or never completed on these brushed in characters. And if you pan up a little bit, Aaron, you can see where they're gently scraping away at the wood. It's not too deep yet, but you can see how they're actually getting that fine carving done of each character. And I will have a more clear example of that. And I think actually, unless Aaron has already gone into that room, I'm getting confused on my multiple tours today, where I've been and not been.
No, we can go in there.
But we've got one beautiful example of two separate poems. One talking about being deported, one talking about being let in. And Aaron is about to arrive at that spot right now. So there was no wood fill on this one. There's speculation around that. There was actually a toilet fixture in front of that, the type of pole chain toilet fixtures where you've got a tank high up above and a pipe in the way. Maybe that was part of it, but then the question is, how did someone do such intricate, beautiful carving? The sentimentalist in me thinks that maybe one of the staff just thought it was too beautiful to cover up, but the guards in truth didn't have much to do with you when you were back in your dorm area. So there was plenty of time to get this kind of work done, even though it was considered a vandalism and it was periodically filled with wood fill and painted over. That wood fill is shriveling up over time, and we're actually getting to see things that have been hidden over the decades. We're getting more clear images and ability to translate more clearly.
Thanks, Bill. I'll go ahead and read this poem. And also so you realize this is very traditional writing. This is traditional Chinese. So most folks read simplified Chinese today. So this is a more formal language, indicating, high level of education. A lot of the poems reference classic literature and legends and things like that. So I'm going to read this. And again, it starts top right, top to bottom, right to left. So the first one goes like this. Detained in this wooden house for several tens of days, it is all because of the Mexican exclusion law, which implicates me. It's a pity heroes have no way of exercising their prowess. I can only await the words so that I can snap Zoo's whip. And then the second one over here. From now on, I am departing far from this building. All of my fellow villagers are rejoicing with me. Don't say that everything within is Western styled. Even if it is built of jade, it is turned into a cage. So there's quite a lot in that poem. The first line or second line, it is all because of the Mexican exclusion law, which implicates me. Mexico had its own laws restricting Chinese immigration, so it's probably referencing that. The last line, even if it is built of jade, it is turned into a cage. Again, jade is that green color that was on the walls most of the time. So this irony, right? Even though it's this color that's important to us, it's turned into a cage. It feels like jail, it feels like prison. Okay, so let's go into one last area and then I'll finish up with addressing those questions. Bill and I can take some of those questions, but let's take a look over here. So again, the women, the girls, the young boys were in a different area, but we do have this one area set up to represent the women's area. And so you can see again how crowded it is. The room that we started in and this room, both of those, again, the healthy capacity was about 25. There were about 60 beds. The larger rooms, the healthy capacity was 50 and there were close to 200. So here you can see, this is the one original bunk. All of the bunk beds are replicas. They are not original. They were all taken out after World War II, but you can see this one original bunk that's still in the building. So they were all, replicas of that. Bill talks a little bit about paper daughters and paper sons. This right here is Lum Wan Hoi. And Lum Wan Hoi's older sister's name was Hao Zhu. And Hao Zhu was set to come over as a paper daughter in 1928. She was 20 years old and was actually kidnapped for ransom. And so the family sent her younger sister, Lum Wan Hoi, in her place. So Lum Wan Hoi was 16 or 17, came into the US, married a merchant in Oakland, lived out her life as her sister's name, Hao Zhu, had this little baby girl, Lena. And then Lena grew up. So here's a photo of Lena as a grown-up. And Lena actually donated her mother's suitcase. So this suitcase that you're looking at right here actually came through Angel Island in 1928. And this is a photo, a copy of her paper identity. So you can see that. So she would have had to carry that to prove that she was allowed to be here. So that was pretty interesting. All right. Let's take a look at what those last few questions were and keep them coming. If you have any more, I'd be happy to answer. So let's see. Okay.
Question about food
Yeah, go ahead.
available. Were there American food? Were they familiar with it?
Food.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, food service was depending on where you came from. Initially, everyone was getting American food, and the Chinese immigrants complained about that and were receiving Chinese type meals. However, you were considered a passenger of the steamship company until you were admitted or deported. The steamship company was responsible for feeding you, and they were trying to find the cheapest way to feed their passengers that were being held. You were getting Chinese type of meals, but everything was steamed or boiled and universally detested by the Chinese immigrants, to the point that the men actually protested and went on a brief, I guess hunger strike would be the way to describe it, throwing the rice bowls to the ground in that kitchen you're looking at now. And my grandmother-in-law tells me that when she came over the first week, the food was awful. And the second week, her paper mom introduced her to the cooks. And she said, they were from my village. They liked me. It probably didn't hurt that I was cute and 18. And those guys gave me great meals for the next 4 weeks. So not everybody got bad food.
Thanks. Thanks, Bill. Let's see. Did anyone hide on the ships to get to the US? I don't have an answer to that. Bill, do you know?
That's a really good question. And I mean, people do stow away. Whether a stowaway would be documented by the immigration staff or just immediately returned, that's one I need to research. I just have no information. Yeah.
No, that's an excellent question. Here's another interesting one. Were the belongings of those housed that were not with them secured and returned when they left, or were there cases of items missing?
I only know of one case where a family alleged that their mother or wife had some gold coins and jewelry stolen. The investigation by the Immigration Service said, no, she never had anything of what she described. But the family, I've actually spoken to the family survivors of that person, and they still allege that she was robbed. And that's just the least of what happened to that poor woman. But that would take another couple hours to discuss. That's what I know that way.
Thanks, Bill. And then this last one, what did immigrants have to demonstrate in order to be admitted? A family member already in the US?
Having means and money. bringing that into the country, having a job waiting for you. In my grandmother-in-law's case, she's going to be living with her father, and she's the merchant's daughter. And the other exemption she used was, I'm coming over as a student to study English, which I really loved because she learned about 5 words of English her whole life. So she had a perpetual exemption that way.
So were the interviews done in English? That was another question.
Yeah, the interview was translated by one of her sons together. And I don't know if Erin has any of the files available to call up, but she had a couple of photographs there that I shared with her that she remembered. The one actually you're looking at is behind me. The Port of San Francisco chose her to represent the Paper Daughters. And that photo that you're seeing behind me was taken when she was 17 years old, the year before she left China. She said that was done specifically at the request of her future father-in-law, or who was to be that. He was filing an affidavit with the government saying, this is my daughter. Her birth name was Wang Funyan. She's pretending to be Chu Yuklun. And that was where she said we started to begin fooling the government.
Okay. Were any poems written in English? So there were poems written in other languages for sure. Not necessarily on the walls, but they were published in newspapers. They were published in Russian language newspapers and Korean language newspapers. And I'm not sure specifically about English poems. Bill, do you happen to know?
I can't think of any offhand. No, the only ones I can recall were written either by Chinese or the Koreans. There were about 1,000 Korean immigrants that came through, and they didn't write so much on the walls. There's just one Korean engraving on a post, but they did write poetry that was published in a book or a newspaper journal at the time.
Yeah, and I've heard of Russian as well. All right, let's take you back outside one more time, everyone, and give me just a second. I'm going to turn the camera around so you can see a little better, and I just want to show you. It really is a nice day. It's quite cold, but it's sunny. Again, you can see, we're surrounded by barbed wire. Down there, in that area, that grassy area, that's where that administration building was, the one that's no longer here. Out there, just right down that way is where there was a wharf that extended 200 feet out into the water. And that's where the immigrants came ashore. The end was a bell, a fog bell, and we still have that bell. That building right there is the coal-fired heating plant. So that's how the radiated heat came in to the barracks here. Let's see. Okay, so any final thoughts or questions from any of you? Let me get the camera back around here and see if anyone has written any other questions. Or Nicole, do you see any others that have come through?
Did the dormitories have indoor plumbing?
Yeah, so they had plumbing. So originally the plumbing, this is pretty gross. Originally the plumbing came straight out of the bay and went straight back into the bay. I'm not sure at what point that changed. So they were bathing in seawater. Kind of as an aside, the health of the bay really changed later on in the 70s. It was really quite polluted. There's a porpoise, the harbor porpoise, that was absent from the bay, I think for like 60 years. And when it returned, it was a sign of good health. But yeah, so there was indoor plumbing, but initially it was not very conducive to being clean. Which country's citizens were best received and most quickly processed at Angel Island? Go ahead, Bill. You want to take that one?
And to some degree opinion, but there is fact supporting it. Coming from Europe, there's oral histories or things written by contemporary people being held there at the time, talking about it was like staying at Club Med. So it was quite a difference in terms of whether you were a passenger or a ward of the steamship company, as opposed to maybe you came first class, you're going to get a better deal, better housing conditions, dorm conditions for folks like that have come first class as opposed to steerage.
Yeah, I was going to see if I can pull up. I don't see the photo I'm looking for. Let me see if I can find it somewhere else. Of basically officials up on top of one of the ships. So let me see if I can find that photo real quick for you all. Okay, I'm not finding it. Any other questions?
I have one.
Yeah, please.
The island poem mythology that you mentioned, is that included for the other for poems in other languages that were published in newspapers and everything? Was it compiled together, or is it just poems found on the building?
There's another book that's worth getting your hands on. It's called Angel Island: Immigrant Gateway to America by Professors Judy Young and Erica Lee, and they cover everything, every nationality, every country, chapter by chapter. And I believe they also quote written things like the information about Korean writing. I was able to get out of that book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so both of those books are excellent. So like I said, Margaret has my email if and phone number. You can get a hold of me that way, get a hold of Margaret and let us know, and we can email you the links to some of those books. There's some really beautiful books. There's also a really beautiful children's book called Kai's Journey to Gold Mountain. It's a beautiful watercolor watercolor photos, and it's about based off of the true story of a young boy who comes through Angel Island. Go ahead, Bill.
I'm sorry, one last one. Professor Charles Egan of, I believe, San Francisco State is still actively researching, and just last year published a very comprehensive research of what he's done on the island. Virtually every engraving in the building, I believe he addresses. So that would be worth looking up. I don't have the title of the book.
Yeah. The engravings and the pictures as well. I'm not recalling the title either, but yeah, Charles Egan. That's cool.
Yeah. Charles Egan.
Oh, here's a great question, Bill. Why did you choose to become a docent because of your personal connection?
Absolutely, yes. If my grandmother-in-law at 17 had decided not to leave Southern China, I would have never had anyone to get married to. And that's how it all happened. I just found it a fascinating, compelling, very heroic thing she did at a very young age. I would not have had that kind of courage, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Bill's one of our favorites. We love having him join our programs. So it's special for all of you that he's here today. So, well, thank you all so much for your time, for your awesome questions. Again, if you have anything further you'd like us to get to you or whatnot, ask Margaret. I think it's wonderful that you're doing these programs with state parks, and hope you get to visit us sometime. We are open. There's San Francisco ferries. There's ferries from Tiburon, and the barracks here, the building that you're in, is open 5 days a week, Wednesday through Sunday. And the hospital is going to be opening as the Angel Island Immigration Museum, and it's open in the January 22nd is the grand opening for that. And Bill, I do see you waving your hand. It looks like you've got Charles' book.
Charles Egan book. I should know the title. I've got it right by my bedside. Voices of Angel Islands: Inscriptions in Immigrant Poetry.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. I've kind of glanced through it a little bit. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but
yeah, it looks good on my table. That's about all I can say right now.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to hang on the line with Bill just for a moment. And I don't know if Nicole or Margaret, if there's anything you needed to tell your patrons at all before you sign off.
Just want to thank everybody for joining us. It was very enlightening, and I loved hearing about the poems and you reading the poems. Those were amazing to just like hear and get an idea of what they were thinking back then. Thank you for joining us. Please, check out our other programs we have in the next few weeks that will continue with the state parks, and have a great day, guys. Thanks,
everyone. Take care.